Hey everyone, thanks for watching. So this is part two of our seller financing video series with Bob Langworthy. The first series came out on Friday. That was how to position and understand owner financing from the seller's perspective. Bob did a great job of explaining the tax advantages and why sellers might do that. We sort of gave you the profile of a seller that would be interested in doing that. Today we're going to flip it. We're going to talk about it from the buyer side. We're also going to take some time to share examples that we've both personally done. Because owner financing is certainly something each of us should have in our bag of tricks, especially when markets roll over. They go from a seller's market to at least a neutral, if not buyer's market. Also, interestingly enough, we're going into probably a rising interest rate world, which is going to make stuff more expensive and reduce values. And sometimes an owner financing relationship could keep a value artificially high, letting the seller feel like they got what they wanted. But you as the buyer can sort of manage the payments and make sure the unit's cash flow. So we're going to go through all of that. And let me welcome Bob back to the video. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing well, Michael. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, thank you. First time three-peat. This is great.
Great.
Yeah,
That's great.
You're now world champion, 3 in a row. Woohoo!
There we go. Yep. A hat trick.
There you go. So let's just take your example that you shared last time. That fourplex, 400 grand, if I remember. And why don't you sort of outline it quickly now, why a buyer might want to do it, sort of set up the fictitious buyer and how they might
Sure.
want to go after this, where it would be a marginal deal or a pass. And now it's something they may want to consider. So why don't you go ahead and set that up?
Sure. Yep. And for those who haven't seen the first video, I'll just lay out the basics of what we're describing here. So this is a fourplex that was purchased in 1989 for $100,000. They put $50,000 of improvements into it, and then have depreciated $115,000 depreciation in the last 30 years. So the building is fully depreciated. It's just the value of the land. Their basis is now $150,000 less in depreciation. It's $35,000. And now fast forward, it's 2019, and that fourplex is worth $400,000. And if this person sells, the seller side, they've got a $365,000 gain. And that's what we talked through last time, and why seller financing is just a tremendous opportunity for the seller. On the buyer side, it's a great opportunity for the buyer too, and this is frankly the easier side of the transaction to talk about. It's what a lot of buyers are interested in doing. And with conventional financing, this potential buyer here would have to come up with 20% down and be borrowing $320,000. And maybe it's a 20-year term, maybe they're at 6%. That's what I've got in my example here, and they're looking at a monthly payment of around $2,300 per month. Now, depending on rents and expenses, that might work for them. It might not work for them. It might be too skinny of a deal, and that buyer thinks, well, this is too skinny for me because I've got to finance this. Probably someone will come along and just throw down 400 grand in cash and it'll work for them. But with owner financing, we now have a whole new opportunity for this prospective buyer to make a deal that works for them and benefits the seller.
Yeah. So again, the owner financing, when I talk to new investors and they think owner financing, they think low down payment, my credit's terrible, I can't get bank financing, which is, I guess that's one way to look at it. What I would tell you as you gain experience, owner financing transactions, as Bob has highlighted, turn marginal deals or passes into profitable, if not very good transactions. Because again, by establishing the communication, we profiled the target seller in the last video, so watch that. But sometimes just having a conversation and laying it out there for them, you can take a pass and turn it into a doable deal. So why don't you sort of set up Bob, how you can do this one from kind of a house hack perspective, and how you turn a marginal deal into a nice deal.
Yeah, great. So with owner financing, you can create whatever terms the two people agree on. And that's really the beauty. House hacking, for those unfamiliar with the term, basically means you own a property. Maybe it's a single family and you rent out a room, or it's a duplex, tri, quad, etc. And you live in it and are renting out space. And in an ideal world, the tenants are covering the mortgage and then some. And if it's, if it's a little tighter, they're at least helping out with the mortgage. And so with this fourplex, if the buyer wanted to live in one of the units and rent out the other three, well, there'd be some advantages from a conventional financing standpoint to do that. But as we pointed out in this hypothetical, the deal might be too skinny. So now we look at owner financing. The person lives in this fourplex and rents out the other three. And the terms that I came up with, and again, this is based on client experiences as well as just a little bit of a hypothetical. They put down 10%, not the customary 20%. So they've got $40,000 down on this $400,000 building. And then the buyer and the seller go back and forth, and they agree on 25 years at 3%. And in the last video we recorded, someone in the comments section asked a very good question that we should probably address. Why would somebody agree to 3% if the interest rate environment now is at 5% or even higher? Why would a seller agree to that? And that's a great question. And Michael, you addressed that in that comment section. And part of the answer to that is if they're financing this, they get more money. The seller gets more money, right? And you can go back, watch the other video. You'll see how much more money that seller makes by financing it at 3%. So back to our buyer side of things now. This buyer now has payments instead of $2,300 a month, they're $1,700 a month. So you've got a cash flow improvement monthly of $600 a month. And across 4 units, that's an improvement of $150 per unit if you're renting them all out. If you're house hacking, that's an improvement of $200 per month per unit in your cash flow. And that's significant. You're talking $7,000 a year, and that's the difference oftentimes in a property this size between making it or breaking it, a deal that's too tight and a deal that's just right. And that's why in this example, it just makes a whole lot of sense to go with owner financing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, the questions that come from our last video were awesome. It really shows that people are watching and sort of paying attention. And in this example, again, sort of subtle here is, the buyer in this example, they only had $40,000, right?
Right.
They're not going to be in today's lending environment. You will likely not be able to buy that fourplex with 10% down, right? There was a time, in all honesty, back in 06, 07, where you probably could have, right? You would have got an 80% first, a 10% second, and then you as the buyer would come in. But that world doesn't exist. That world was bad financing, frankly, and led to the crash. So the banks demand the customary 20, if not 25% down. But again, this is the seller. They own the building outright. They get to choose what they would like to do. So in this case, they would take the 10%. They're going to finance it over 25 years. And they've agreed to a payment that would net, that starts with 3% interest. So these are all things that sellers and buyers can negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it was 25 years. You could do 50 years if you wanted, right? Again, right. These are all negotiable, right? You could do, in theory, you could say $1,000 a month in a huge balloon payment, right? There's just all kinds of things you can do when you have a discussion. And again, the beauty of having this skill is you can turn a marginal deal or a pass, or even a non-deal, because you can't get financing, into a deal. And that's very powerful for folks. So I thought what we would do maybe now, Bob, is get out of the sort of realm of the fictitious deal we've talked about over the last 2 videos, 400K fourplex, and maybe share an example or 2 of owner finance deals we both have done, and just to put some clarity around why it was good for both parties and all of that. So you want to start?
Sure. I'm in a position now where I'm beginning a conversation with the owner of a local office building about an owner financing deal. The building I'm in now is our first big real estate purchase, and it wasn't owner financed. So from a personally doing a deal standpoint, I haven't done a deal with owner financing, but I have clients who have done deals. I'm an accountant for those who are new to our videos. Clients who have done deals with owner financing. that are, fantastic deals for both sides. And it's a beautiful way to go. You've got deals that you've done and are in the midst of making payments on right now. So I'd be fascinated to hear what you've got going on.
Absolutely. So I'll talk about two owner finance deals I've done. I did in 2018, so really recent. So the first one was a house. This just like the first video we did on Friday. She was over 50, right? I'm not going to get into ages, but just say over 50. She owned it free and clear. She lived about an hour from the property. She had historically managed it herself. And she was getting to the age where the drive and the hassle factor of being a landlord was getting too much. She had it under rented. She was renting it, if I remember correctly, for $600 a month. She hadn't raised the rents in a decade because, she got friendly with the tenants and felt they were part of her family and sent Christmas cards and, all of that stuff. And, the building probably had less maintenance than it should have, or the house had less maintenance than it should have. Because again, the tenant was paying under market. They didn't want to call in all these things and potentially, raise the flag of, raise their rent. So fast forward and she's like, we had a conversation and she's like, I don't want to be a landlord anymore, but I do rely on the cash flow, right? She needed that money to pay her bills or live the lifestyle that she was accustomed to. So we had a conversation. And basically found out that she netted roughly $500 a month is what she needed from that house. So what we did is we worked out a relationship where I would buy the property for $5,000 down, basically covering transaction costs and escrow fees, so she didn't come out of pocket with anything. And then I would pay her $500 a month for 15 years. So if you do the math on all of that, it's a $95,000 purchase. So a couple of things. First off, we agreed to 0% interest. It's all principal, right? So 500 times 180 payments, which is 15 years, is 90 grand. I then paid $5,000 down. So that's where $95,000 come from. Now, in fairness, this property probably was worth, in the condition it was in, probably about 100 grand, maybe 105, because it needed work. But what she was able to do is get out of it free and clear, not bring any cash to closing, and she still gets her $500 a month. I now have an asset that I bought slightly under market, but I was able to go in and raise the rents and the tenants didn't move. We didn't know how that would go. I raised it from 600 to 1,000. Everyone's happy. I've since gone in and done some small maintenance and whatnot, because again, the tenant did not leave, even though they squawked quite a bit. It turned out to be very good for everyone. I have now another cash flowing asset in a great part of town that was values raising. And if the tenant ever left, I could repair it and the property would probably be worth 180 to 200 grand. But again, I'm a landlord and I'm happy to keep it. I'm happy to keep paying $500 a month on an asset that's $1,000. And, she was wildly happy and thanked me so much. And she sent me a Christmas card this time. And, it just tells you when you have a conversation with sellers and they sort of fit that profile, that you can have, a great relationship. So that was a deal that I did last year.
That's a great example. And probably for those watching on the video, the thought of 0% interest, no interest, is probably a new idea to them. But again, with owner financing, it can be whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely.
Two follow-up questions for you on that deal, Michael. The mortgage, if you will, on this property, how was that drawn up?
We drew it up and recorded everything. Just a single, note. A note was created and attached to the deed. So she's in first position. We do have a prepayment penalty because she wanted the payments. I think
that was my next question.
Yeah. So we put a prepayment penalty out there. I think at 5 years. If I wanted to pay it off early, I had to cut her a check for, I think, 10 grand. So it's pretty beefy, right? My intention is to hold it, frankly, until I'm her age, which means this building would be paid off. So I was happy to do that, right? Because again, one of the things with owner financing, when you're having these discussions, is you need to protect them also, right? The last thing I would want to do is put a deal in place. Let's just say in this example, the building was worth 200 grand and I bought it for 95. And then, 60 days later, I go refi it, take all my cash out and then some, and I pay her off. Well, frankly, that would make me feel terrible as a person because I've just not negotiated in good faith. I've not given the seller what they wanted. So I actually brought up the prepayment penalty with her. And I said, you know what, let's put in a prepayment penalty so you have protection. We talked about when that would be, and we agreed on it, the first 60 payments or 5 years, right? 5 times 12 is 60. And if I paid her off in any time in the first 60 payments, that I owed her an extra chunk of change, which she felt really good about. And frankly, I felt good as well.
That's great. And that goes back to something you mentioned in our last video, which is the importance of a relationship with between the seller and buyer in these kind of arrangements. It's a much closer deal, frankly. There's a sense in which it's arm's length, like any transaction, but you've got to know the person, trust the person, and then you want to look out for each other. So that's great. My other question for you on this deal was, did you have an inspection done on the property?
I had my team walk through it. I did not do a real home inspection. Okay. I certainly could have, but again, as a landlord, it was being lived in. I knew there was stuff. I'd walked through it and seen, wow, Yep. If they leave, because I do these all the time, it would have been 12 to 16 grand remodel, right, to make it rent ready.
Yeah.
But I was never sure they were going to leave because they'd been there forever, and their kids were in school and all of that. So I did go through. I did have somebody look at the roof because roofs can get expensive. It was fine. It didn't need anything for another decade or so. But I didn't do the detailed home inspection. I frankly find those. I find those guys look for problems that maybe aren't the problems. So I had my team go through it though.
And for those who haven't watched, all of Michael's videos, Michael's got 13 or 14 years experience now in this, and so has let's say more than an amateur's eye when it comes to looking at a property. And so, but having a professional look at the roof is great, and having your team walk through the property is more than adequate. So that's great. That's a great example.
Yeah. And again, the whole beauty of this is the seller wanted out, right? Some people call them frustrated landlords and all of that, but it was a frustrated landlord with a twist. She didn't actually think about owner financing. It was through the discussion because she was torn. She needed $500 a month to continue to live her lifestyle. And she feared that selling this asset and getting a chunk of cash and paying the tax man, frankly, would injure her. It may feel good for a year or two, but the money would disappear, and what is she going to do then? So she was more than happy to do this and set up payments. And frankly, she believes that the payments will outlive her, which is why we did 15 years. So.
Well, here's why that particular seller may have been okay with 95 instead of 100 or 105. So right off, someone's going to say, well, she saved the real estate commission. I'm not really concerned about the real estate commission. That's small money. What she gets by selling it to you for 95 as opposed to going to the market for 100 or 105 is a guarantee, or keeping the property, frankly. She gets a guarantee of $500 every month. And if she had kept that property for the next 15 years, in her mind, she did not have a guarantee of $500 a month. You mentioned the roof. Yep. Well, there you go. You need to replace the roof, and there goes your $500 a month for 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
With that type of expense. So she has traded a property that she was not really wanting to manage anymore for guaranteed income. And for her, that's exactly what she was looking for, and that's it's a great arrangement for both of you.
Yeah, there's no chance that she could have continued to I'll use a word I've heard before, milk that property for much longer. It has been underappreciated for quite a while, and frankly, that goes on both parties, right? The owner and the tenants, right? The tenants weren't, I have spent in my first 6 months of owning that property, let's just call it roughly $5,000, just putting it back to where it was, fixing a leak here or there in the sink, repairing some flooring, just bringing it up to a standard that I'm happy to have in my portfolio. And again, that $5,000 would have been roughly a year of payments or a year of cash that she needed to live on. So you're absolutely right. This deal worked out great for both parties. I have an asset that I will own until I die. Then my kid will get it in a stepped up basis, and sort of everybody wins. So these are the things you can do when you have the right conversations.
That's right. And the value add component of this is a great lesson as well, that you were able to go in and it took an certain amount of intestinal fortitude, if you will, to raise the rents like you did. But you have the conversation, you write the letter, you explain we want to get it up to market, and that's what's fair. And right away, you've greatly increased the value, as you mentioned, maybe 180 or 200 on a property that you are going to end up paying 95,000 for. So that, again, one of the huge benefits of rental real estate, and why we're on this podcast now, a video now, and not talking about the stock market, is you have an asset that you can do things to increase its value.
Yep. While
it's also increasing the amount that it pays you.
Yeah.
It's a win-win. And you've got the increased cash flow and the increased value of the asset by doing some very simple things to it. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this one rental at a time is just a message that works, right? You get one. The first one's the hardest. The second one is, exponentially easier, and the third one's easier than the second one. And as you gain experience, your net worth, your cash flow, your income, you really can become financially free off rental properties and cash, specifically, cash flowing rental properties. So don't bet on appreciation, people. That's a bad idea.
That's right.
So any other questions or thoughts come to mind, Bob?
Well, the other thought that comes to mind, and I think it was Jay Scott who said this, and I'm not sure if it was in your interview with him or in another interview with him, that he doesn't encounter very many people that own just one piece of rental real estate, that they typically own zero and are talking about it, or they own multiples, right? Yeah. So this, with the help of the last video and this video, hopefully someone who's on the fence right now and owns zero properties, but likes the opportunity that rental real estate affords them, will step out and get that first property, which then, one rental at a time, will lead them to 2 and 3, and 4 is a great number that you've talked about, and then from there on up.
Yeah. I saw that interview. That was Jay Scott, his latest interview on Bigger Pockets. I think it was third time he was on that channel talking about, sort of his new books that came out that he spoke about on this channel. But yeah, I thought when he said that, I'm like, you know what? He's right. I meet lots and lots of people that have zero and then are talking about it, as you say, or they have more than one, right? And it's all because that first one's the hardest. It feels like a huge mountain. But once you get on top, you're like, well, that wasn't very big. I should do that again. So I thought that was very wise of him. And frankly, I'd never thought of that, but he's so right. I know nobody with one. Yeah. I can't think of anybody that just has one. So very, very cool. Well, Bob, I always turn it over to you at the end. Why don't you again, one more time, list how people can get a hold of you. You are an accountant to real estate investors. And if anybody's looking for an accountant, they need one. It's best to have one that has real estate experience and understands the game and all of that. So please list how they can get in contact with you. So if they're looking for an account, they can reach out to you.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. You can find me at Bigger Pockets. I'm fairly active there. And my company website is mainbeancounters.com. That's Maine like the state where I live, beancounters.com. And also, I had one person reach out after the last video when I made this offer. I have both a spreadsheet and then a PowerPoint I created for it available for anybody who's watching this who wants to see those. I sent them off to Michael too, so if you reach out to him, he can pass those on to you as well. And you can put your own numbers in the spreadsheet and see what that looks like. And PowerPoint kind of gets into more of a backstory and walks you through what that relationship between a buyer and seller would look like.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you again for doing all this. This has been a great three-peat. This 2-part series has been awesome. It's something I knew we had to do after our first interview. So I want to thank you again for giving us the time, and have a great day.
Thank you, Michael. You too.